The brand new Gen 3 Supercar is now out in iRacing. It's got a big engine, a loud noise, and tyres that technically connect to the racing surface. It's also got lots of people racing it. There's splits happening at all hours of the day. There's just one problem. I'm still seeing people from Europe and people who live in the Americas being like, oh no, I can't do it. This car's too difficult. It's got too much power. And my response to that is, it's not really that hard. You need to stop being a baby. So today we're going to learn to drive the Gen 3 Supercar in iRacing. Let's quickly go through what the car is, how I reckon you should drive it, and I'll also go into pretty much every single setup option that you can play with in the car and some tips that I think will help you win some races. For starters, Supercars is Australia's main series of motorsport, and it is actually the biggest touring car series in the world. Raced in this series are some cars that joined in 2022, the Generation 3 Mustang and Camaro. These are the two that have just joined iRacing. There will also be a Toyota Supra coming in 2026 as well. These cars are a lot of fun to race, but they're also quite different from other cars for a few reasons. The main one is the source of a lot of people's issues, and that is the engine and the driveline. They have a V8 engine producing over 600 horsepower with a sequential box and a spool diff. The spool differential is a bit different to most cars. It basically means that the rear axles are always spinning at the same speed. It means that it causes understeer when you enter a corner because your inside wheel needs to get off the ground to make the car turn, sort of like a go-kart. And it also causes issues applying power if you're not exactly straight because both wheels are spinning at the same speed. New for this generation of car is a bunch of changes from the old Supercar if you've driven that before, but the main one that you'll feel in iRacing is a reduction in the aerodynamic grip. It will move around a bit more at high speed than the older car. This actually makes the car a fair bit easier for a lot of drivers. The car is less snappy than the previous car. It kind of goes a little bit more progressively and it makes it a little bit easier to catch. So what's the trick to driving the V8 Supercar? Well, for starters, I think it's worth talking about how to shift gears because that's kind of the main hurdle that I think a lot of people face. So the Supercar has a cut on upshifts, so you can just pull gears, you can just upshift when you're driving down the main straight, but I recommend shifting when all the lights go red, so shift as late as possible when upshifting. When you are downshifting though, you'll want to rev match to avoid compression locking the rear tyres. You can do this by blipping the throttle when you downshift gears, 10 to 50% throttle, hit the throttle. You're just braking with your left foot and you hit the throttle with your right foot. You can also right foot brake and heel and toe using the clutch if that's easier. That's also the way pretty much all the real life drivers drive this car as well, if you can right foot brake. With the new car, you can also downshift without blipping now, but you will lock rears with the compression locking and torch the rear tyres, so try not to do that. If you are too scared to blip, that's fine. I would turn on auto blip in the driving aids section of iRacing. Talking about burning tyres up, the tyre in the Supercar is really sensitive and it's probably the other thing that a lot of people really struggle with when they drive the car. It's especially sensitive to heat. And unlike a lot of cars in iRacing, the Supercar has the most grip when the tyre is cold and brand new. This means in qualifying, your first lap will always be the fastest. Same in racing, your first lap is the fastest and you'll progressively get slower. And if you really want to try hard in qualifying, you can do a slow out lap before your flying lap to really preserve the tyre. How do you preserve the tyre in the race? Well, there's a few things. The main one is to not get wheel spin, locking, or slide the car. Every time you light the rear wheels up by using too much throttle out of the corner, it will superheat the tyre and you'll lose a lot of grip. The same thing also applies to locking fronts and rears and also sliding the car. It's sort of a spiral that you'll get into. You'll wheel spin going out of a corner and hurt the rear tyres because of the heat, and then the next time you leave a corner, you'll have less rear grip, so you'll wheel spin again, and then you'll get even less grip, and it basically just continues and continues until you need to pit and slap on and use other tyres. So the best way to avoid this is to be patient. If you lock a tyre or if you light it up leaving a corner, be careful not to do it again for a lap or two and wait for the tyres to cool down again. It is tempting to short shift this car to avoid lighting the rears up, but I don't recommend it. I just say avoid it where possible. I also recommend downshifting as early as possible into a corner to get the engine braking to really slow the car down. Be careful not to do this too early though. You can money shift the engine and blow it up. Under brakes, you want to use as much trail braking as possible to get the car turned. With the spool diff, you'll have big understeer on the way into a corner before you get oversteer on the way out. Another thing to be aware of are the lock-up lights on your steering wheel that will give you a lot of information. This is useful to see if you're locking wheels, especially rears for the new drivers. It's hard to tell. So the red lights on the inside of your dash are your rear tyres. So if the red lights are going, your rear tyres are locked. White on the outside means pre-lock for the front. Your fronts are like locking a tiny bit, and blue is like you've really locked a front tire. So use that to work out if you're locking tires under brakes. So let's get into the setup of this car, and there is a manual for this car that I recommend reading, but I'll quickly summarize all of the things that you can change in this car. For starters, I should say the cars are the same. The Mustang and the Camaro are exactly the same, so they run the exact same setups. You can drive whichever one you want. They just sound different. Let's start with tire pressure. You just run minimum. That's nice and easy. Then you have braking. We have master cylinders that you can change. Basically, a bigger master cylinder means less pressure. So if you find you're maxing out the brake bias, you can change your master cylinder. You can also change it for feel, basically the front and the rear one. Brake bias is a bit more obvious. The higher number is moving the brake bias forward. Locking fronts means you want to go backwards on the brake bias, and locking rears means you want to go forwards. Rear bias will also help turn the car, and front bias will also kind of add more stability during kind of straight line braking bit. New to this car is the throttle map, but basically 6 is a linear straight line. It's just like 50% throttle means 50% throttle, 75% throttle means 75, and 100 means 100. 1 gives you a tiny bit of throttle at the start and it kind of ramps up progressively. 10 gives you a lot of throttle at the start and kind of ramps off progressively. I found going lower in the throttle map suits my driving style, so I'm running like 3 or 4 at the moment, but this is all preference based, so run whatever you feel is best. Roll bars. So in Gen 3, you can't change this in car for the first time, but you can play around with digressive bars for the first time. Basically, digressive bars change how stiff the car is depending on the ride height, and it will change so the car kind of moves up and down. It's too confusing for me to explain. You can read the manual if you want, but basically, softer roll bars means the car rolls more, it provides more grip, especially at low speed. Stiff is less roll, so more stability. At the moment, I'm finding speed going stiffer on the roll bars. You can also change the blade angle, which will affect the stiffness and the softness of the roll bar. Spring perch offset is your ride height. This took me like a good 2 years to learn the first time that I was driving the supercar. I was like, what does this word mean? That controls your ride height. I would keep it very low in the front. That's what I recommend. Your spring rate is how stiff the springs are. It controls how fast the car loads up. Like roll bars, I'm finding going stiffer seems to work for me. And bump stiffness is your damper adjustment at how fast the damper compresses. Rebound stiffness is how fast the damper extends. Stiff seems to be working for me, but you can control this based on the bumps and things on a track and how fast you're going, basically how fast you want the compression and the rebound. The next setting is camber. This kind of affects the angle that your tires are on the road. More camber generally gives you more cornering grip, but less like longitudinal grip under like braking and throttle. So if you're getting kind of loose midway through a corner, maybe add more camber. But if you're getting if you're struggling to get the power down or braking, I'd probably reduce the camber and put more tire on the road. Toe-in changes how your tires are pointed. Roll center has 3 options in this car and changes how the car rolls in a corner. And droop travel is kind of interesting because I don't think many other cars have this. This is related to the diff. This controls how far the suspension extends when unloaded. This is useful for trying to turn the car. As we have a spool diff, you need to lift the inside rear wheel off the ground when you are turning to get the car to turn. Lower droop travel will help the inside rear wheel raise. So play around with that setting if you want. You've also got fuel. Run as much fuel as possible in the race because you'll likely have to stop for more. And drop gear is your gearbox ratio, not to be confused with drop bears, who are dangerous marsupials. Set it so it almost maxes out at the end of the longest straight. That's pretty much all the setup options. There you go. So how do you race this car? Well, I think the series, for starters, has a lot more contact than something like GT3 or open wheelers. It's a little bit more common to kind of rub panels with other drivers, so be ready for that. And the races on iRacing feature a standing start. So in the Supercar, we use a line locker to start the car. In iRacing, it's called the handbrake. So you can set that to a button on your wheel for the start. Hold the handbrake and release the clutch with maybe like 50% throttle until you find the bite point, and then when the lights go out, release the handbrake and you drive away. I also say you should remember to pull first gear before you do that, because if you don't remember to pull first gear, your car won't move and then someone will crash into you. We've all done it. The races are also long enough to feature a pit stop at the local servo in pit lane because you'll need to refuel. Feel free to use auto fuel in iRacing if you're struggling, and remember to change all 4 tyres. It takes a few seconds to change and it will happen at the same time as fuel. Your fuel will pretty much always cover your tyres. So whenever you stop in the pits in the Supercar, always change your tyres. When do you race this car? Well, at the moment the series is going official like all the time. So you can race it whenever you want. There is an Australian server and an international server series. You can race either one. You don't have to be Australian to race on the Australian one, or not in Australia to race on the international one. It's just telling you which server the race will be held in. If you do want to take it a bit more seriously, there are like a couple of strength of field races where lots of people agree to sign up for the same time slot every week. The main one is 9:15 Australian Daylight Time on a Monday night in Australia. That's 10:15 GMT. You can also rock up to a race in the European time zone at 7:15 p.m. GMT on Thursdays and Fridays, and also a US one at 10:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday and Friday. So those are the softs, and that is the Supercar. I think it's a really fun car to drive. I think everybody should try to drive it. I think a lot of great drivers have come from this car and progressed on to great things. Like we talk about, I don't know, I'm giving an example, Dane Warren, Josh Rogers, fantastic drivers from Australia, really became known before they were internationally known. They became known driving the Supercar. It teaches a lot of really good skills, and I think it's worth picking up for yourself. Give it a fair go, and if you're struggling with it, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you can leave a like, and you can also subscribe to Overtake for more sim racing videos. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.